A lot of people just can't stand question period, and I don't blame you. I think that question period is a lot of times a joke. I think that the Speaker of the House, the new one and the old one, abuses his power, and I think that it's questions and no answer period, which is why it's called question period and not answer period. However, when you filter through all of that stuff and you look at the main people that are debating or arguing or delivering questions without ever answering, Pierre and Trudeau or Pierre and whomever, you find a masterclass in how to make liberals look like a fool. And the best person is Pierre Poilievre. He's now received global attention. He's gotten the eye and the attention of lots of very famous Americans, right? Elon Musk is now aware. Joe Rogan is now aware. Australian media is now aware. Even India News is aware of Pierre Poilievre. And they all pretty much, I don't want to say they support him, but they certainly don't support Justin Trudeau. So we're going to take a look at a series of videos today of Pierre Poilievre delivering a masterclass on how to embarrass woke liberal idiots. And it really isn't that difficult, but the way that Pierre does it, it just looks flawless and effortless. So welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I want to encourage you to give a like and subscribe if you haven't yet already. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Mr. Speaker, we know that after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of housing, which has doubled since he took office. It's gotten so crazy that the cost of a house in Ontario means that one couple sold their 2,000 square foot home in that province and was able to buy a 6,000 square foot castle on 37 acres of land in France. They now say they could never sell the castle and afford to move back to Canada. Why does it cost more to be a member of the middle class in Canada than to be an aristocrat in France?
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservatives. And Canadians will take no lessons from the Conservative, Mr. Speaker. There is one thing, Mr. Speaker, not many I agree, but there's one thing that the Leader of the Opposition can do for Canadians watching at home, Mr. Speaker, is to vote for the affordability bill, Mr. Speaker, that will empower more competition in this country, that will reduce GST in new housing, Mr. Speaker. Well, once for all, will they vote for Canadian, yes or no?
Speaker, none of the bills are affordable after 8 years of this government. I asked, why is it that you can buy a castle in France for a lower cost than a middle-class home in Ontario? And his response was basically, let them eat cake, Mr. Speaker. The fact is, people can't even afford bread after 8 years of inflationary policies. Will they reverse their inflationary deficits and reverse their tax hikes so Canadians can eat, heat, and house themselves? Yeah. They've been promising for 8 years that their bills would lower the cost, but since that time, housing costs have doubled. They promised their carbon tax would make people better off. Then they brought in a second carbon tax, and we asked the government's own officials at committee yesterday if their analysis showed that the cost would rise for energy and that these costs would be borne disproportionately by the poor and middle class.
So the impact analysis stated that the clean fuel regulations would increase the cost of energy and disproportionately impact low and middle income Canadians. Is this correct? Yes or no?
That is correct, yes.
So the government was advised that the clean fuel regulations would increase the cost of fuel and still proceeded with them.
And that government official confirmed that yes. Why is this government taxing the people who can least afford it? Will they admit that after 8 years, they're simply not worth the cost?
Trudeau and the Liberals are certainly not worth the cost. After 8 years, you have housing prices are as high as they have ever been. And when you look at historically, the average income in Canada versus the house price, I don't know what exactly it should be, maybe three times what your household income should be of a house. It's so ridiculously out of that range now, and we've never seen this in history in Canada. And not just house prices are skyrocket high, but you also have interest rates, mortgage rates, and rent is just not, it's not controlled. It's not really regulated. And that's why so many people are basically drowning. And I feel very terrible for the generation coming fresh out of school into the workforce where they're questioning whether they actually want to live on their own or stay in their parents' basement for a little bit longer and try to get some savings. And to that I say, good luck.
Now they say it's all about the inflation. Yes, inflation is hurting, but the reality check. Take a look at the interest rates around, inflation rates around the world. I'm wondering if the leader of the Conservative Party can be more honest and straightforward with Canadians in regards to the reality of the situation, comparison to other areas of the world. Canada is doing well.
Boy, does he ever need to get out of this place and talk to real people if he thinks Canada's doing well. Holy smokes. Maybe he hasn't been to the tent cities that have formed right across this country that never existed 8 years ago, that were perfectly pristine and safe neighborhoods now overtaken by misery and pain from people who can no longer afford to pay their rent. Maybe he needs to go door to door and ask people what they're paying on their monthly mortgage payments. Maybe he needs to talk to the 1 in 5 households where they're skipping meals because they can't afford the food. Maybe he needs to go to the bread lines that go block after block, street after street next to food banks. Those kinds of bread lines we do not see outside of either the Great Depression or the Soviet Union, Mr. Speaker. If he thinks things are going well in Canada, he needs to get out and talk to the real people who are suffering from coast to coast.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about cuts. Canadians are making cuts in their own lives. We now have a new phenomenon in Canada, which is the middle class homeless. We used to just have young people living in their parents' basements. Now we have parents moving into their children's basements. Will the Prime Minister reverse the inflationary policies that doubled housing costs and are forcing seniors to move into their kids' basements just to avoid going homeless?
Canada has a AAA credit rating, the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, and low unemployment. And in addition, we will always be there to support the middle class, Mr. Speaker, whether it is 6 million old age seniors with the old age security benefit, whether it is 11 million Canadians with the grocery rebate, whether it is 4 million Canadians with the business supports. Mr. Speaker, what we do on this side of the House is invest in Canadians to build a stronger economy day after day, year after year, and we will continue on that course.
Well, what incompetent rating agencies mean absolutely nothing to the, quote, unhoused seniors who say that for affordable housing in Metro Vancouver, that the only thing that turns up is nothing, nothing, and nothing. Nor does it mean anything to, and I quote again, this is even from the CBC, living in his broken down car, homeless man says he has until Thursday to move. We have both nurses and carpenters living in parking lots after 8 years of this Prime Minister doubling housing costs. Will they stop driving up the cost of living so that Canadians can house, feed, and heat their families?
I don't know about you, but inflation for me in my area is certainly not 2.5% or 3.5%, whatever the Liberal government is claiming it is. When you compare grocery prices now to 12 months ago, you're looking at 25 to 30% increase. And this is going to be a brutal winter, one of the worst ones that we've ever seen, not because of climate change. By the way, the best way to combat climate change, from my understanding, is hitting that like button, subscribing, and turning post notifications on, because it balances things out with the amount of Liberals that cry and that emits happiness into the ozone layer, and it just balances things out. So take my word on it. The source for that is, trust me, bro, we're heading into winter and everyone's gonna have to heat their homes, and it's so unaffordable. You're talking about potentially $500 to $1,500 a month to heat your homes in Canada. It's not sustainable. It's ridiculous, and it needs to stop.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government, we're starting to see the hard reality that inflation is the price you pay for all of the programs the government told you were free. Remember, the Prime Minister said he could double the debt, but don't worry, the budget would balance itself. He said that interest rates were low, so not only were deficits permanently affordable, we couldn't afford not to spend. Well, here we are with the devastating human consequences not so long after that, because, as Pythagoras says, numbers rule the universe. No matter how many words are spoken, no matter how many soft lullabies are sung, the reality is that when you spend what you don't have, you drive up the cost for everyone else. And here we are, the cost of government has driven up the cost of living. $500 billion of inflationary debt has bid up the goods we buy and the interest we pay. According to former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley, the government spending is pressing its foot on the inflationary gas pedal, which forces the Bank of Canada to press on the brakes with higher interest rates. And now I bump into people across Canada who are living in financial terror. A shipyard worker in Vancouver told me that his monthly mortgage payment is now $7,500. He's a shipyard worker, Mr. Speaker. 4,000 of the 750, of the 7,500, 4,000 is just for interest. His family is spending basically 50 grand a year on interest for their mortgage. This after the Prime Minister, his budget documents, and his bank governor told that man that rates would stay low. You'd think the government would reverse its policies, but they're doing the opposite. A year ago, they said they would balance the budget by 2028. 6 months ago, they changed their minds, so they'd balance the budget. Never. Last week, we found from the budget officer that the deficit is 15% bigger than the government claimed only 6 months ago. They have lost total control of the spending. Our common sense plan caps spending, cuts waste in order to balance the budget and bring down interest rates and inflation. And let us do it before the hundreds of billions of dollars of mortgages renew into these higher rates. Let us save their homes and our future. It's common sense. My colleagues will work to bring home this common sense here in Canada. Your home, my home, our home. Let's bring it home. Thank you.
The witch of the Wicked West herself, Mr. Speaker, the one whose grandfather was a literal Nazi, Chrystia frickin' Freeland. And it's unbelievable that she's even an elected member of Parliament. I don't think she'll ever get reelected. I think this is her last term or whatever you want to call it, because she's just, first of all, has ties to Nazis in her family, which is just atrocious. Second of all, she's a horrible, horrible, horrible minister. She has literally said in the past that the budget will balance itself. It just doesn't make any sense. And she is the one who's putting Canada in a freaking deficit. And you know who has to pay it? Not the government, not other countries. You and I are responsible for our government's failures. Imagine that.
Last fall, the finance minister promised a balanced budget within 6 years. Last spring, she broke that promise and said that we'd have a balanced budget. Never. And last week, the parliamentary budget officer revealed that her deficit is now 15% bigger than she said it was only 6 months ago. Has the government lost total control of our debt? And how much is this inflationary spending going to add to the interest rates Canadians pay on their mega mortgages?
Our government will be providing an update on our debt and deficit figures and on our revenues in the fall economic statement in due course. When it comes to Canada's fiscal position, let me also be very, very clear. Canadians should listen to the independent ratings agencies whose job it is to evaluate Canada's position, and not the partisan talking Canada down attacks of the opposition. Canada's AAA rating has been reaffirmed by ratings agencies since the budget. We are strong fiscally.
Well, apparently former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley is just a partisan using talking points when he says that this government's inflationary deficits are like pressing on the inflationary gas pedal and forcing the Bank of Canada to press on the brakes with higher interest rates. Canadian families have the highest debt load of any country in the G7, and those debts are colliding with the rates that this government is driving up. Will the finance minister cancel her inflationary deficits, balance the budget to bring down interest rates and inflation, or will she admit that she's just not worth the cost?
Let me again bring some independent, non-partisan facts to this conversation. It is the job of the ratings agencies to determine the fiscal sustainability of every country's fiscal position. And ratings agencies have reaffirmed Canada's AAA rating. And you know why they did that, Mr. Speaker? Because we have the lowest deficit in the G7. And because, Mr. Speaker, we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We believe in fiscal responsibility, Mr. Speaker, and the numbers show it.
The independent, nonpartisan voice that I'm interested in is the shipyard worker in Vancouver who told me that his mortgage payment has now risen to $7,500 a month. $7,500 a month for a shipyard worker and a middle-class family. That proves that this Prime Minister, after 8 years, is not worth the cost of mortgage payments. According to John Manley, Liberal Finance Minister, their deficits are driving up interest rates on the back of mortgage holders. Will she reverse these deficits so that we can bring down inflation and interest rates before the shipyard worker and millions of Canadians lose their homes?
And finally, if you had any hopes, any at all, that our debt would go down, you were wrong. It turns out our debt is only increasing because our finance minister and our government is just so incompetent. They think that this is like golf. The lower your score is, the better. The more money you're in the hole, the better. It doesn't make any sense. Here's the clip.
Tell the committee and Canadians how much we're spending or projected to spend on interest on the debt this upcoming fiscal year. Just looking for the number.
Let me just say, because I think it's important to put things in context, that in both...
Minister, my time is very limited. I'm asking if you know the number. You have a lot of officials beside you. Will you tell Canadians how much we're going to spend on servicing the debt next year?
Here's what I think, that it's really important to put numbers in context. Without context, numbers are meaningless. Our debt service charges are low in Canada's historical context, and they are low compared to what our peers in the G7
Thank you for the context. What's the gross dollar value we're going to spend on interest on the debt next year?
And let me again, I really am opposed to fiscal fear-mongering by the Conservatives. And so the important point to make for Canadians is that in historic context, our debt service charges are reasonable and sustainable,
respectfully,
and
Minister,
lower than they have been in many previous years. That's why S&P reaffirmed our AAA rating.
I'm asking, will you tell Canadians how much we're spending on the debt? It's in black and white in your book. Do you just not want to say?
I think that it's important to put all numbers in context.
Thank you, Minister. I'll move to the next question.
And do you not agree that in historic context, our debt service charges are absolutely handleable?
That's where we're going to end today's video, ladies and gentlemen. I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments about any of the topics that were covered. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to give a like and subscribe on your way out if you haven't yet already. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now. Thanks so much for making it to the end of the video. If you want to support the channel financially, you can do so by checking out the merch shop linked right up there. Or if you want to do something for free, which is also absolutely acceptable and highly encouraged, you can subscribe right there. If you want to continue watching videos like this, you can do so by clicking or tapping right there to watch the next upcoming video. And if you want to watch a little bit of different content, but also Canadian stuff, you can do so by clicking right up there. That's my second channel, House of Canada, also known as the House of Commons Highlights. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.